What's up, everybody? SJG Perspective. I appreciate everyone tuning in. If you could share this out, I'd really appreciate it. I think this is an important little reminder article that we're going to talk about today. And what we're going to talk about is the New York Times is warning readers against critical thinking because that's bad, lest they realize that paper of record is feeding them lies and every other mainstream, quote unquote, narrative obeying news outlet. So let's jump right into this. And again, just without wasting any time here, make sure you guys share this out and like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. So jumping into this article, it says New York Times warns readers against critical thinking, lest they realize a paper of record is feeding them lies. Critical thinking is dangerous, according to a Times editorial, urging readers to vet sources with Wikipedia. We're going to get into that one, lest they fall into traps set by evil conspiracy theorists and be tricked into questioning the paper's ironclad truths. The irony of this article, as we get into this, is pretty staggering, right? It's pretty staggering what they carrying on. Charlie Warzel, a Times columnist who styles himself as an expert in online radicalization. My question right here is, how does someone become an online expert or become an expert on online radicalization? Hard to say that word. Has employed his readers not to go down the rabbit hole. What rabbit hole, you might ask? Well, that'd be the rabbit hole of doing your own thinking. Thinking for yourself. That's not where we don't accept that here. That's not okay. In a Thursday op-ed luridly depicting the dangers of evaluating new information. Think about that danger, or think about that statement right there. It is dangerous to evaluate new information. He's depicting it saying, if you're trying to evaluate information you're given, that's dangerous. You shouldn't do that. You should trust us. Questing out into the internet armed with nothing but one's own mind. Thinking critically can lead to giving away one's precious attention to dastardly conspiracy theorists, whose only apparent goal is to dupe you, he warns, as opposed to the friendly narrative of at the New York Times, right, or an NBC or ABC or Fox or any one of whoever you're tying into, Vox or the Atlantic or any one of these places that have a very set goal on what they want to say to you and what they want to tell your brain to think, and these like what you need to know from today, what you need to know from this week. These kind of things always bug me. It's like what you need to know, about today's news. You need to know what is important to you, number one, and then you need to really kind of look into it. But that's not okay, because then you're starting, don't critically think, basically, is what this article talks about. As opposed to the friendly narrative from the New York Times, who simply wants to make sure your brain is quivering with the required fear quota of viruses, Russians, neighbors, terrorists, white people, or the capacity for believing wrong think lurking in your own brain. Like if we go here and we look at, some of the articles that the New York Times puts out, who is an authoritative source, they're not conspiratorial and you need to believe what they say, even though they flip-flopped on so many things and have been called out on it. COVID-19, the U.S. has its own worrisome variants. Fear, 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 right? Or this one here where it pulls out and it says 100,000 names behind the grim new toll. Man, everyone's dying. We'll go over here to COVID-19 brings out all the usual zombies, right? New York Times retracts Caliphate podcast and reassigns reporter admitting star ISIS executioner likely never went to Syria. So they retract it because apparently they were wrong. But see, most people would have never known that, or will never find this kind of stuff out. It's the fact of what the New York Times or other mainstream authoritative sources want to tell you is true. Those are the people that you should listen to. And don't, as this Charlie Warzel is saying, do not critically think and seek some of this information out or read these conspiracy theorists who are telling you anything different than what we're telling you. It's logical that the Times should warn its readers against engaging too deeply with the wrong think, of course. Times readers often lack a solid grasp of the views they consider to be their deeply held beliefs, having picked them up absent-mindedly from one approved source or another without thinking too deeply about their implications or how they might possibly conflict with their existing values. They simply want you to believe the authoritative sources that are deemed authoritative by the very authorities that want you to believe they are authority on truth. This is what this circular cytogenesis logic is in the mainstream news that we always, in the mainstream articles that the mainstream press gives us, that the mainstream programming is put into our brain, is just trust what we're telling you because we're authoritative sources. And if you don't believe we're authoritative sources, just ask us. We'll tell you that we're authoritative sources. And you know what? Facebook will only put us because we're authoritative, and so on and so on. And Twitter and Twatter and all the rest and everything else. YouTube, everything else. It's this circular thing. It's the fox guarding the hen house of logic. That is, if the average time readers were to think too deeply about the material they ingest every day with their morning coffee, the resulting cognitive dissonance would cause their brains to explode. The paper contradicts itself on at least a weekly basis, as the narrative managers gleefully mine out the foundations from beneath it. Common sense and independent thought are constantly mined out of our news stream, what we're being told. And the crackdown right now on this is incredible. Anyone who is not abiding by the official narrative, whether it be COVID, whether it be wars, whether it be the crime, whatever it is, we have an official narrative, and we will never challenge that with good faith debate and discussion. We will never balance that with opposing viewpoints, pros and cons, and let the people figure out what's really going on in the world, because they don't want you to figure out what's really going on. They want to tell you what's going on, and they want you just to believe that narrative. And if you don't believe that narrative, well, then, boom, you're a conspiracy theorist. Wurzel cites a professor who warns that the goal of disinformation is to capture attention, and critical thinking has deep attention, implying that to think critically about some foreign or forbidden morsel is to fall victim to the evil masterminds who created it. The natural human mindset is a liability in an attention economy, he continues, making sure that readers get the point that it allows grifters and conspiracy theorists and trolls and savvy attention hijackers to take advantage of us and steal our focus. Steal our focus, the focus they create with their fear porn and their mainstream narrative that is absolutely opposed to any good faith discussion. That is the focus that they're worried critical thinking or conspiracy theorists are going to steal. It's going to steal the focus that they are trying so hard to maintain. The irony on this is just mind-blowing. The professor, one Michael Caulfield of Washington State University, Vancouver, offers up a series of thought-stopping cliches to be reverted to whenever one believes one is reading wrong things. So basically, here's the stop, drop, and roll procedures for concerning critical thought or thinking critically. Stop, drop, and roll. This is what you need to do. Stop doing what you're doing. Investigate the source. Find better coverage. And 4, trace claims, quotes, and media to the original context. Now, agreed. On the surface, this isn't necessarily bad advice, though the professor's advice is to take no more than 90 seconds to do so. 90 seconds. See, what they want to do right now, what we've seen happen with COVID, what we've seen happen with vaccines, and COVID, the whole thing, right? But vaccines, masks, death count, PCR tests, so on and so forth, is they infuse from the mainstream narrative too. What they've been doing is they want to cause confusion, so you don't even know where to look. I don't know how many friends have told me, where's a good fact checking site? How do you really know? Because we all see how these fact checkers are so biased most of the time. How do you know how to figure out if something is true or not? And they want to do that. They want to shoot in with so many different angles and lasers of different information that slightly conflicts or contradicts itself, right? So that you just are like, what? Forget it. I don't even know. What does the headline say? Okay, I believe it. They want to create confusion so that you don't think critically. So it bogs down your mind. It's where one investigates the source and finds better coverage that the problems lurk. While Wurzel doesn't come right out and recommend to its readers seek out Wikipedia, the bathroom wall of the internet. He does quote an assistant political science professor at the University of Nevada, Reno, that's what I meant to say, who believes that the supposedly crowdsourced yet intelligent agency-dominated encyclopedia known for hosting massive hoax and conducting reputational... I am having a frickin' frack time today, damn it. Reputational hit jobs is actually a great evaluating source. So if you guys don't know what cytogenesis is basically the source checking the source. It's somebody making a claim, then writing that claim in a, let's say, a news article, and then other people, when they're checking that source, they check that article to fact check their source, and it's just one big circle of nonsense. It's called cytogenesis, right? Citation, beginning. It's citation, genesis, beginning. Cytogenesis. So it's essentially just of the fox guarding the hen house when it comes to how they portray to you the information that is supposed to be authoritative and trustworthy. Wikipedia is the armpit, honestly, of fact checking, and it's so funny because everyone points to Wikipedia as the source that you should go to. And while Warzo pads that the professor's advice with his disclaimer that recommending Wikipedia is a method that could be exploited by conspiracy theorists. Oh, the irony. He has no problem recommending searching unknown sources on Google and going with the top result. I remember, it's so funny, my sister one time, years ago, before this was nearly the thing it is now, she said something so insightful that I made fun of her. And I'm sorry, Kim, that I made fun of you. But she's like, oh, when I Google something, I usually go, 3 or 4 or 5 pages back before I start reading. I'm like, that makes no sense. Okay, Kim. But now it makes a lot of sense, because what Google does, Google contractors in charge of ranking websites for search engines are advised to use Wikipedia as their primary source of guidance for evaluating trustworthiness of an unfamiliar article or an unfamiliar website. Again, this is just that circular logic that makes no sense at all. But again, you get called the conspiracy theorist when you say, I don't necessarily believe everything Wikipedia has to say. It's definitely not black and white and set in stone. They talk a lot of nonsense. Never mind the massive disclaimer that the site, Wikipedia, carries, warning that any and all content may be false. That doesn't deter the underpaid contractors doing Google's dirty work from swearing by it. And apparently it does bother the paper of record. It doesn't bother this paper of record either. At least now we know where the Times journalists, right, are really doing their fact-checking. It's no secret that the establishment journalists, especially the sort who write self-styled papers of record, consider themselves something of a priest class. And that's so true, man. These arrogant, pretentious, holier-than-thou, self-righteous intellectuals, the way they look down, that's what I can't stand about the intellectuals. I watch my buddy Rob. Shout out to Robert Knorr. I watch him, and he does these panels with these other liberals or leftists or progressives. And the thing that I just can't stand about almost every progressive leftist I've come in contact with is they think they're so smart. They think they're so holier than thou. They're so pretentious. They're so, oh my God, you're a conspiracy theorist. Oh my gosh, you're such an idiot. Oh yes. Well, that's what they said, and I believe it. That's what Fauci said, and I believe it. That's what Biden said. We believe it. That's what the New York Times said. We believe it. That's what, whatever, fill in the blank. We believe that. You're such a conspiracy theorist to think otherwise. And then when they do their fact checks online, when you're live doing stuff with them, and they're just like, see, it says it right here. Problem solved. It's like, no, you idiot. The 90%, the great majority of everything that we're reading has been carefully curated to stick to the talking points, the narrative, the message, the on-point message of what they want us to hear. And it isn't until you get off of that and you start to look at other sources, and don't just blindly believe any source, but you piece them together till you can finally really figure out what's going on. And they know that's more work than most people are going to do. So those people are going to just believe the mainstream. And then the people who are going to do that, it's easy. We just throw them up as conspiracy theorists. It's a win-win. Tasked with translating the divine word of politicians and experts so that ordinary people who don't realize there's something deeply wrong with the whole situation. And it's no secret either that these narrative managers, that's a very good way to put them, they're the narrative managers. They're not journalists, they're narrative managers. Realize they're outnumbered by the alt media commenters. People like me, people like Rob, people like Drone, people like, Sarah, people like Frank, these different sorts of, these are just people, right? Like the Tim Pools of the world, or, the Ryan Christensens of the world, or, the list goes on and on and on, right? These people like me, and I'm not saying I'm some perfectly, some order of truth by any stretch of the imagination. I can't even freaking talk half the time. I'm a little tongue-tied. But at least what I'm doing is I'm trying to look at the alternative narrative on something. I'm trying to look at the opposite of it. I'm trying to look at what is balancing, what counterweights, or what counterbalances what everything else is telling me. What's the counterbalance to that? And it's so interesting when you dive into that, when you can find it, man, it makes a lot of sense. Who've taken it upon, the alt media commenters who have taken it upon themselves to report the facts left out by the establishment. So the only hope for Warzel is the world is to hold their noses and convert ordinary folks to their doctrine, in which the once noble discipline of fact-checking is perverted into an unusable bludgeon against ideological foes. Those growing movement is reflected in Twitter's Birdwatch program, where you can have just a user-sourced fact check, which is a joke. In Facebook, since a discontinued effort of when they were trying to do the crowdsourcing ratings of news articles. And of course, Wikipedia, which we've already talked about, which is just a cytogenesis of nonsense most of the time. Only by knighting the hoi polloi, which is common people, common man, as the foot soldiers of orthodoxy, can they be inoculated against the threat of critical thinking? Because the real issue with politics, with COVID-19, with the endless bloody wars, with pretty much all of the U.S. problems, is failure to critically think, which is why they feverishly try to discredit in every way possible, alt commentators like myself and like others, and people who simply want to say, hey, what's the counterweight to this? What's the countermeasure to what you're trying to tell me? They're not even trying to hide it anymore. They're just literally coming out and saying, don't be a critical thinker. Don't be a critical thinker. Believe what we're telling you, and don't trust those alt commenters and those conspiracy theorists, and don't waste that valuable energy of mental energy on giving any kind of focus away to anybody who's not the authoritative source, who we say is authoritative and who we grant authority to. All right. Hope that all made sense. Please like, please subscribe, please share, and make sure that your brain is working between your ears the way you want it to work. And take the time with some of these things to search out the counter narratives and weigh them out. Not the counter narrative won't always be right, but it's not always wrong either. So till next time, it is SJG Perspective. We'll talk to you soon. Have a good night. Without fear or animus. Stephen, bye. Out. That was awkward.